we go. Okay. All right. We've got 90 odd people here. That's good. Some more will be coming in soon. It is now 6 minutes past 6, so let's get the show on the road. So, hello everyone. Welcome to London DevOps. Thank you for coming. This is our first meetup after the summer break. Don't know about you, but I had a bit of an unusual summer break, as I think many of us did, due to the pandemic and all the fallout from all of that. So hopefully you all had a good one and are ready and back and working and back into your DevOps like we were before. So London DevOps, it was good to see a lot of new faces here. People I don't recognize the names of, that's brilliant. Good to see new people coming along. Thank you to everyone for coming. So we're going to talk about DevOps. For me, this is a perfect definition of DevOps. Everyone's heard 101 different definitions of DevOps. I imagine most of you are no different. That's my favorite one. It's about building a culture where people, regardless of title or background, can work together to imagine, develop, deploy, and operate a system. And thanks to Ken at ThoughtWorks who came up with that. DevOps might not mean that to you. Please don't drop off the call right now because of it. Maybe it's more about building a culture. DevOps can be as much about culture as it is about tools. But for many of us, we kind of live and breathe, putting in the right tools in the right place, hopefully putting the right process in place, and having the right culture that can support us actually doing some good DevOps. So that's what DevOps is. London DevOps is a meetup group. We were formed in this current incarnation back in the summer of 2014. So we've just ticked over 6 years of this group doing it. So Mark picked the group off the floor, very kindly invited me and then Alex and Jack along to help me run it back 6 years ago. Here we are again. This is our 54th meetup. We've been running them mostly monthly. Back in the olden days when we were allowed out of our houses without restrictions, we used to go to physical venues. They were great. We kind of miss those days, but ho hum, we have to do what we can. So now we're virtual. So the MO of the group is basically to share a load of knowledge. We get speakers along, we have panelists as well, who have stories, war stories and good stories, good and bad, good, the bad and the ugly around doing DevOps, whether it be cultural, process or tools. And we hope to share that sort of knowledge. It's an opportunity for us to meet new people, for all of you to meet new people. One of the changes we've made with this meetup, as opposed to the previous ones we've done virtually, is that we're now just doing a standard Zoom meeting. So we've got everyone coming in on a meeting. We did a Zoom webinar before, which we felt was a bit impersonal. If you were an attendee, you could only really see my ugly face and the fellow organisers and the people who were speaking. There was no real opportunity to mix or for attendees to contribute in a way which wasn't just me reading out what they'd said in chat. So we're doing it as a Zoom meeting. It does mean that you as attendees can have your cameras on if you want us to see your smiley faces. Does also mean that you can unmute and speak if you want to. I'd ask you to please stay muted for the duration of the talks. Please don't interrupt the speakers. When we get to the panel sessions, then please feel free to unmute and contribute to the discussion. And also if I invite you to come off mute to say something, then that would be great. So other things, we're here to help each other out. Everyone's here to share experiences. Well, some people are here to say, look how great I am, look at this DevOps stuff that I did. But that's not really the sort of thing we're about. It's about sharing the knowledge and learning. And so everything you hear here or see is shareable unless you see otherwise. Okay, so as I said, we've been going for 6 years now in this current incarnation. Most of the videos from most of the talks are up on our YouTube channel. This one will be no exception. So what you'll find there, if you go to YouTube and search for London DevOps, is you'll see all the old talks. Similarly, if you want to go and revisit something that you've seen today in one of the talks, or if you want to show it to your colleagues or your mum or your dog or whatever, then they're all there. So we've gone virtual, but we do still need a code of conduct. So that's the code of conduct for our meetup. It's something we do take seriously. It's obviously become easier given that we're in a virtual world now, but we won't hesitate to enforce the code of conduct if we need to. But we know everyone's nice, so we won't have to, right? I'll just leave that there on the screen just for a couple of minutes. Not a couple of minutes, just a few seconds. Okay. So this is your organising committee. Are we a committee? I don't know. Group of people. Dictatorship, don't know. Anyway, there's the four of us here. So there's, if guys, fellow organisers, if you want to just come off mute and say hello, Mark.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jack.
Hi, guys.
And there's Alex.
Thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
And I'm the good-looking one.
Hi, Mark.
So yeah, we're the four organisers of the meetup. If you have anything you want to add, any comments you have on the meetup, on how it's going, we love people telling us how great it is, which a lot of people do, and we're very grateful for that, but we equally want to know how we can improve it. So please don't hesitate with that. Also, if you're interested in being either a speaker or a panelist, or maybe even doing this new harebrained idea that a couple of us have had, which is of doing a London DevOps podcast, and you want to be on that, then get in touch with one of us there. You can see all of our, those are our Twitter handles, but I'll share some, get in touch on Twitter, or I'll put up an email address a bit later on and a hashtag if you want to do it that way. Talking of hashtags, there's our one. So please do put up some tweets, get some social interest going around the meetup regarding what you see here. So hashtag London DevOps is the one. So meetup couldn't really be the meetup without people volunteering time and effort and money sometimes. So we're very lucky to be sponsored by a few good companies. So first of all, Prism Digital, actually, no, Alex, do you want to describe Prism Digital? I know you're going by a slightly different name now, right? Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, no. So yeah, Prism Digital. I say we've been finding people jobs. We're talent partners basically, and we've been working with people in the DevOps and cloud space since about, I think people were using the word DevOps back in, for us it was around 2012, and yeah, I just think we keep it real. We don't want to be. We want to be honest. We want to be transparent. We want to build long-lasting relationships and be good people. Basically, that's our mantra. Avoiding the R word, the recruitment word, really. But traditionally, we are a recruitment consultancy within the DevOps and cloud space. Yeah, and hopefully, you know us by now.
We know you, Alex. Yes. Okay, cool. Thank you. Similarly sponsored by Adaptavist. Adaptavist is the best Atlassian, well, I would say that the best Atlassian partner. We do lots of work with Jira, Confluence, all of those tools, Jira, Align, Safe, etc. Lots of digital transformation work as well in areas of cultural change and agile mindset, that sort of stuff. So we do that sort of thing, and Adaptavists most notably allow me to spend some of my time on making this meetup happen as well. So thank you very much to them. Thank you to the Adaptavists who I see on the call as well. So good to see you guys. Thank you. WeShape as well. So this is Jack and Chris's baby. Jack or Chris, did you want to come off mute? And say
I'll just quickly say as well that I've just seen a few comments that I think a few people are trying to still enter the event. So you might have to let a few people in still. I'm not sure how it works, but I'm not sure if you have to accept them into it. But yeah, so what WeShape, we're a DevOps and cloud native consultancy. So we work with businesses on kind of technical solutions, squads. So yeah, if you want to talk to me about outcome-based DevOps projects, give us a shout.
Cool, thank you, Jack.
More people are in now, so well done.
Yes, the button for allowing people in is not accessible when I'm showing my screen. Hooray! Thanks, Soon. Maybe it's on the menu somewhere, but you don't want to see me fiddling with that. So I'll just let people in. I'll go and let more people in in a couple of minutes. So yeah, sorry about that if you were waiting for a while to get in, but I just seen the number of participants rocket, so that's brilliant. Okay, so finally, we're also sponsored by O'Reilly, who send us goodie bags to give out at physical meetups, which we haven't done for a while. So that point is kind of mute, but we appreciate their support. So today we're going to have a couple of talks. Well, actually, we're on a new format now, as you would have seen. So we're going to do, the whole idea behind this is that we have a headline talk, rather than having 2 or 3 talks that may or may not have been tied together, or may have been on different subjects, which is kind of good because you can you get more people coming along, because some people are interested in culture talks and some people are interested in tools talks. What we decided to do, try it out for a few meetups, is have a single talk and then a panel session which is themed around the talk, the first talk. So we're going to try that and see how it goes. It's also a response to the fact that because we're not all going to a physical venue anymore, we're not really, and because lots of us are just hanging out on Zoom all day in our jobs anyway, we probably want a slightly shorter meetup as well. So we do a talk and a panel, bit of a social afterwards. I've got some San Pellegrino here, which is fantastic, but not quite what I want, but there you go. So we'll crack open the stronger stuff afterwards. So you can stick around on the Zoom. We'll have a little bit of a social afterwards, which will be open for as long as people want it. So we'll try that as the format for the meetup and see how it goes. So first of all, Justin, who is very generously going to be talking to us about infrastructure and scaling it at Disney Plus from 0 to 1 million users. Justin's now with AWS, but he's talking about his previous engagement back at Disney. And then the panel session. So again, following on, we'll talk about scaling infrastructure. Where do you start? When you start a new job and maybe you're working for a startup, or maybe you're working for a bigger company who's going to do something big. How do you get started with that? So we're very lucky to have 5 or 4 awesome panelists coming on that. Not sure if Justin's coming on that. That's why I said all 4. I'm not saying that one of our 5 panelists is not awesome. Why do I dig myself holes like that? I don't know. Okay, so that's the end of the that's the end of the intro. Tell us what you think. As I've said a few times during that intro, you can get in touch with us on the meetup page, tweet us individually using the organizer links, or with that hashtag, or you can drop us a good old-fashioned email to org@londondevops.co.uk. So that's it. I'll stop sharing and we'll go and hit admit all. There we go. Get a few more people in. Excellent turnout. Fantastic. Thank you. And I'll hand it over to Justin, if you're there. And we can see your share. So without further ado, here's Justin Garrison, who's going to talk to you about infrastructure from 0 to 50 million. Thanks, everyone.
There we are. And man, that slide that you showed with my face, I was like, that was pre-COVID. And wow, that hair was, I remember it fondly. But anyway, yeah, let's jump. Thanks for the intro. This is, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what it was like to do the infrastructure part of Disney Plus. I am looking for the chat. I wanted to bring it up just in case if anyone has, oh, there it is. I want to set some expectations for the talk. I like Matt was saying, it's hard being all remotes. And so let's get some interaction here. If you want to even just like throw an emoji, or I want to ask your questions, in either the panel, or I'll stick around for the social as well, if you have more specific questions, but just give me a little feedback to let me know you're there. It's really weird just being alone in my office and talking to people. So thanks, Nick. So yeah, so let's set some other expectations for the talk itself. As Matt was saying, we like to tell stories here, and I love telling stories. Being working at Disney for so long, stories are now part of how I do things, and want to set some expectations for this story specifically, where ideally this story is actually very boring. Compared to all of the cool things going on in infrastructure and DevOps and everything else, there's There's no Kubernetes in this talk. I'm sorry if that was an expectation. There's no distributed tracing necessarily. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about service meshes. I'm not talking about hot new Argo CD or CI/CD platforms. I'm talking about some boring infrastructure that was used to go from 0 users all the way up to 50 million and beyond. So tracing, hey James, how's it going? James was also on the team there, so thanks for joining. Tracing, yes, they're not saying these tools aren't amazing and they solve a lot of problems. They would be great in so many use cases, but that's not necessarily what we had. And so we built with what we were working with. So, and this, again, a long time getting to infrastructure that will do this automatically for you to scale to this. So don't just think this is happening overnight. And so let's start again. Like we were saying, we're gonna tell a story. What's one of the best stories? Right, a long time ago, galaxy far, far away. Let's just go right into it. And I know some of you are thinking like, well, like this was just last year, right? Like, yeah, November was a long time ago at this point. I remember November fondly, and I miss it, I gotta say. And this galaxy far, far away, it's like, well, like this was Earth, right? And it's like, yes, but again, pre-COVID, and Earth was different. And I'm actually really sad that I couldn't come out to London to do this in person, because I've only had a chance to go to London once, and it would have been great to come out and see everyone, faces besides the little boxes. But maybe sometime in the future, when all this is over, in the whenever, I guess like Star Trek would be in the future. So I guess that's post-COVID or something. But anyway, that's really the only 4 slides I have. The rest of it, I'm going to tell a story. And not to say we don't have some visual aid to help. I like stories. I like drawing pictures. Slides sometimes are constraining to be able to see a full picture of what was happening. And so I actually drew out this timeline here for what it took to go from that 0 to 54 million. And from my point of view, I was with Disney Streaming for I started 11 months before launch. It was December of 2019. But the company that was in charge of launching Disney Plus had been around for a very long time. And I'm not going to go into all that fantastic history. That was 2001 is when BAMTech Media started. They did a lot of cool stuff. They were streaming things for a long time. They had lots of different customers and streaming services. They were doing, if you're watching like UFC live fights or ESPN Plus or MLB live streams, like that was all BAMTech Media from the early days. And so a lot of history here of building streaming services, doing live streaming. One of the HBO Now apps was also BAMTech Media. So there's a lot of stuff in here that BAMTech learned along this process. And there was so much stuff that when I came in was just automatically taken care of in a lot of cases. One was team structures and specifically the workflow of how people were doing things. DevOps was in the mindset of everyone already. Teams had ownership over their infrastructure. It was self-service for deploys. There was a lot of that stuff that was hard learned for a good 18 or 17 years before I even got there. And it was fantastic to walk into that environment and say, oh, people aren't sending me, artifacts to, push to production. People are getting their own pages for their teams and their services, and all that was just key to being able to do this, and was, I'm sure, one of the reasons that Disney was interested in partnering with BAMTech to build Disney Plus. It was one of those pieces that was like, you can have some of the tooling, you can have some of the products, but the culture and those values and the workflows really help you kind of accelerate that inside of a shorter time frame. So we're going to go right into where I started here. Like I said, 11 months before, and I started December, but this is me. And I was in charge of, I was the technical lead for cloud infrastructure on what we called productivity engineering, which was centralized services. And so we ran anything that would make a lot of developers more productive. We tried to write tools or host infrastructure or things like that for developers just to be able to use it and go self-service as much as possible. Oh, I got it muted. These centralized services included things like the deployment tooling that a majority of containerized workloads used. It also included things like CI/CD pipelines. Basically, as a service, you request it, and you get your own instance of Jenkins that was, would tie into your infrastructure and you could use to deploy, managed by another team, upgrades, plugins, all that stuff was done by centralized services. And then the infrastructure piece, which I always like to call the day two operations, which was the centralized actual container orchestrator. For us, it was ECS. And then everything else you might need, like logging integrations and monitoring and some bits and pieces that most people shouldn't have to worry about. Things like, what AMI are we on? Do we have CVEs patched? Do we have integrations with other things? Are permissions set up? And even lower level things like DNS and NTP. That's where I kind of came in, and the infrastructure that I was in charge of, specifically for that platform that we had across the board. And so when I came in, we have 11 months, we're shipping a product. We don't necessarily know what scale there is going to be. We do have some things, like I said, the company's been around for a long time. There's things already running in production with multiple regions, multiple accounts, and how do we kind of change this infrastructure as we go, and what do we think might break? And so that was really where we started this conversation with the team of, okay, well, we know we need to launch in 11 months. We need to set some priorities here. And in this story, I want to point out very explicitly, like, I'm not the hero of this story. I'm more of an antagonist than a protagonist in a lot of ways. For me, as someone hosting infrastructure, the real hero of the story was essentially vendors, right? Like the people, the services that we relied on to build and ship these products were absolutely key to making any of this work. And so if you're doing this on-prem, if you're doing it with your own teams trying to do everything from the ground up, you're going to have a lot more to do. And so we were able to lean into all of the services that we could get from a vendor. And I'll go into that a little bit more on how we figured that out. But obviously the very first thing that's always going to break is DNS. Right? Everyone's like, hey, DNS, that one is going to break. I know it because it's DNS. And in our environments, we had hybrid situation. We had our own DNS mass servers that allowed us to bridge DNS for on-prem and AWS. And so how do we make that safe to do inside of this new environments? How do we scale that? How do we just make sure that doesn't go down? The second piece was actually log storage for us. Logs were very critical to how people debug things, how they were looking at production systems. And we had some self-hosted, Elasticsearch that we were using, but we knew it wasn't going to scale to where we needed it to be. So that was the second piece that was called out, that in previous, years had some scaling issues or problems that we either didn't have expertise on my team, or we didn't know necessarily what we wanted to do with that, how to make that just available for everyone without them thinking about it and letting it scale as much as we need. And the last piece was just the underlying infrastructure. How do we make this scale? Will it scale to whatever number we think it's going to be? And how do we make it safe to change? How do we mutate the infrastructure? How do we make it so we can iterate on things when we know something like, a month before launch, we're going to have a CVE come out. We need to be able to change instances so we're secure. And those sorts of things where, how do we do that fast? And so our checklist here, just going down the list of, well, let's look at what we have. And DNS, number one, hey, just before, a few months before, Amazon announced managed resolvers, which allowed you to do custom domain forwards. Great. We can offload all of our, centralized DNS mask that was, again, multi-region, multi-account. So there was VPC peering, all this stuff. We can get rid of that, and we can rely on the managed resolvers from AWS. So we can roll that out. We have a plan for it. Log storage. Let's look at some vendors. Let's look at who can scale, who can give us the features we want, and what the cost ratio is going to be. And in this case, like I said, we had self-managed instances for things like Elasticsearch and CloudWatch logs. And we just took the cost of, okay, how much does it cost us to run all of this infrastructure by itself? How much are we spending people time to maintain it, update it, and work on it? And a lot of that was like, okay, well, we're roughly, I don't remember the numbers, but we're at some number and one person, time to dedicate it to this thing. And then we compared vendors and we said, oh, look, like at our current rate, like the vendor is actually cheaper and we get a person back. Like that's a no-brainer. Like if you can just say, hey, like vendor, you are amazing at doing this scale up system. We can work with them. We can partner with them to do this for us. We offload a lot of that work and we get a person back to do some of this. And then the third piece was scaling it and building it. And at the time, especially for ECS, there wasn't a system that would work across accounts across clusters, across regions, the way we wanted it to be able to mutate that underlying infrastructure. And so we really needed to, we knew we needed to build something here. And just to give a little bit of context too, the team size for infrastructure was, you know, the group of productivity engineering was growing, but the infrastructure team was actually myself, was the newest person. I had been there for a month, one person that had been there at the time for 8 months, and 2 other people that left shortly after I got there. So we went from 4 people, 2 of them had been there for a while, to 2 people, which neither one of us had been there for a year. And so we knew, hey, we're really gonna have to build something, but we have to limit our scope, and we have to understand like what we're going to build and why we're going to build it, and really prioritize here. And that's another key factor to why we're buying from vendors to do some of this stuff, because with 2 people, and I was, you know, again, technical lead, I did a lot of interfacing with internal customers, figuring out what they needed, what we could do, what we couldn't do. And so my hands-on keyboard time was also limited. So really leaning a lot on the, you know, engineer on my team to be able to do a lot of this work. And he did fantastic, by the way. I don't know if he's on the call, but it was amazing to have him here. So this gets into the story part where I just call the boring montage, right? Like this is, you play the music that goes on, and this is where all the engineering actually happens. But I can't actually talk about that because we want to get to the other part where the graph starts going up. But just to touch a little bit on kind of how we solve some of these problems, the DNS managed resolvers, we thought, hey, we have multiple accounts, multiple regions. Terraform's a great fit for that. It's all AWS resources, and we can change, you know, our VPC, our subnet groups and hosted zones to be able to forward those domains and manage that in a centralized place with Terraform, and just have it out there and ready to go. We can query the state for all of our accounts, all regions at once, and it was a fantastic fit for that piece of the engineering. The second piece was the logging and managing a partner infrastructure to say, hey, this is how we want to manage our logs. And so we were splitting up things with RBAC per index. So a team had an index, and we wanted some security rules around who could see which logs. Mainly for things like GDPR and security, and we could safely put certain things or I mean, most things weren't in logs, but teams didn't have cross access to like all the logs. If it was a global index, everyone could see everything, which would first of all be noisy for people, but also just be bad to be able to like see, oh, your team's having a problem over here. And like, let's just limit some of that scope, let people focus on what they're experts in and what they're doing. And so we wrote some tooling around that to also manage those RBAC rules, single sign-on, how we create indexes, all that kind of stuff. We definitely leaned on the partner to give us those APIs. And that third piece of building, in this case, we wanted to stamp out clusters over and over again in regions and in accounts. So how are we going to do that? And Terraform wasn't quite the right fit because of how it mutates state on things. It's sometimes copy paste for, I need to do the same thing 20 or 30 times. Terraform is a lot of repetitive code. And in this case, CloudFormation fit great because CloudFormation is a template with some variables, and I use the same template over and over again. And that creates new stacks in CloudFormation, which is great because I can look up how they're exporting things. And so there was a lot of custom tooling for us, leaning on AWS SDKs to be able to stamp out CloudFormation stacks using things like step functions. We could call an API, store some state, and actually would do that for us, which was a great way for us to be able to, again, small team of essentially one full-time engineer, myself doing small things here and there, to be able to get this to stamp out. And it was a great solve for us. And hosted state by Amazon, all that sort of stuff just came with it, which was great. So rolling just past that montage, we're about August timeframe when we're working back from launch, and we say, okay, November's here. When can we actually make these changes? Like, what is the last date that we can do anything this big? Where we're rolling from new tooling to manage the clusters. We also are doing things like updating ECS agents. We're updating the Amazon Linux version. We're changing config settings. We're using another service for logging. We're going to find a lot of things that we don't know about. So there were so many unknown unknowns that we had to roll out, and we didn't have time to do them slowly one at a time. So boom, like it's going to happen somewhere. And we decided to do that. It was around August timeframe. roll that out in smaller and dev clusters and just kind of keep going. And a couple things we learned out of that was, first of all, finding those limits. You're not going to know them. You're not going to know everything about the infrastructure, especially if you're new in the environments. Things change so frequently. So you're going to have limits with APIs for your own services, for your partners, whether that's AWS or a service you use. So you're going to have to find those and adapt to them, either caching locally, storing things, or just doing incremental backoffs. Maybe you can call it less, get a different type of API, a different endpoint to get more information at once and do processing locally. All options to find those limits, but also looking at things like disk IO and network IO. If you're going to start scaling up, you need to take those into consideration of what type of fundamental lower level resources am I going to use, and where are those limits? And so finding those things are also great to know early on. And I've a whole story about cascading failures, but luckily we were in dev, so it was all good. And so our tooling, one of the key things we wanted to do was optimize for iteration. Again, like I was saying, we needed a way to mutate the state of this environment very frequently. And there's a change management process. There's windows for like process to say like, hey, I need to make a change to everything. But we needed to make that shorter because historically that might have been a week or two. And at this point we needed that to be like a day or two, because if we keep waiting weeks to make these changes, by the time we get to November, we're still rolling out stuff. And so making it safe with our tooling to do rollouts helps so much here to make, to optimize for those iterations. And third piece here, automate things that wake people up. Making it safe for people to operate these systems is sometimes not thought about. We're just like, well, I'm just going to optimize or automate everything. Maybe not actually a good idea. Find the things that wake people up. Automate those first. Like if you find a cool problem and say, I'm going to automate all of this because it's so big and I love the, the language it's written in or whatever. Like, no. Find the thing that woke up your coworker the night before and say, hey, I'm going to make that problem go away. Because you really need people to run these systems no matter what. So just make sure that that's a key piece of how you're choosing what to automate when. And then that fourth piece of just document, like everything's going to be changing. Documentation is never 100% up to date, but again, making it safe for people to operate the systems. We need runbooks. We need just general diagrams of what interacts with what pieces inside the infrastructure with whoever's going to possibly mutate that state. And so being able to give a picture of this is what this infrastructure looks like at the time it's written is way better than like self-documenting code is I don't believe in it. Like I've read too many pieces of code that I've written and I don't understand. And so trying to understand infrastructure by looking at Terraform just doesn't work. Like draw a picture, have a wiki page, and write that down for a person in people language, not Go or Python or something. Like actually just write the real English words and it'll be better for everyone. So right about here, just after we roll out, we had a surprise. If you know story arcs, this is where we're getting up to our climax here. Hey, we're rolling out to a limited release in the Netherlands, and so we actually have production users on the system now, which was super exciting. Again, Disney Streaming had been running ESPN Plus. There were already production users on other systems. This was the first time the actual Disney Plus was, hey, there's users on it. If it goes down now, it's bad press before launch, and that's bad. And so making sure that everything is safe and testing your code, testing your infrastructure, like those are good things to do now, just to have more assurance in the changes you're going to be making. Because here we are again in that timeline, September comes, we did a little soft launch, November's coming quick. Right around this time frame, October, right in the middle there, we have a code freeze. What does that mean for infrastructure as code? Like, big question that a lot of people don't ask. They're like, hey, we're going to launch, all the code is frozen. It's like, wait a minute. If you're writing Pulumi, if you're writing CDK, if you're writing, that's code. And I hate this code freeze, real code, infrastructure is not real code. Like, no. Bash is code. YAML files are code. Anything you're checking into Git is code. I'm okay with that piece of it. So have some borders around what does a code freeze mean. And in this case, code freeze meant, backend systems, applications that were part of the product. And in the product, you could still make code changes, usually needed some sort of approval. You had to go up to a director or VP or something like that to push out those changes. Everyone at this point became infrastructure engineers. Everyone said, okay, my app is done. I now need to scale. I need to look at settings on my load balancer. I need to look at instance types. I need to change different things. You're still making code changes. You're still pushing inside a CI/CD pipeline. It's just not application code. And I always like to distinguish that of infrastructure. If you're doing it this way, is still code. You should treat it that way. When someone says it's code freeze, get some definitions around what that means. As we're scaling up here, a few more things we learned. API limits, again, once you're going to go 10x your infrastructure, you're going to find new limits. I don't care what it is. You're going to find something else that's like, hey, this isn't working very well. Some of those can be easily mitigated. Things like changing an API version or API path, using new libraries of what your API is, like where you get it from for that API may solve all your problems. In our cases, we had a couple APIs that the old library version was using the wrong path. So it was doing extra lookups. Once we switched to a new version, hey, guess what? I'm doing one call, processing that locally, and everything is great. Scaling early, super critical here. Waiting 2 weeks before a global launch, probably not a great idea. I would definitely recommend you scale a little bit earlier than that, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, just to be able to say, hey, is all the infrastructure available? Are all the resources available? Where are those API limits? And then the third piece here for me was swarming those problems of people are going to have, no audio? Okay, we're good. People are going to have problems. You don't know what they're going to be. Help. Swarm those problems. If you like, hey, no, like that's not my problem. That's not my area. If you have some insight, if you might be able to like offer a hand, just being able to give options. So one problem that we had on the infrastructure side was we were scaling up. The instance types we were using were no longer available in the regions and availability zones that we were scaling to. We couldn't get more. Like just straight up, like the cloud is amazing, allowed us to get to this point. It's not infinite for every single instance type, for every region, for every AZ. So options, go to more regions, go to more AZs, mix instance types, add new ASGs. There's a lot of options here, or just switch to new instance types that are more readily available. Figuring out where it's safe to change the state of your infrastructure at this point in time. Again, this is 2 weeks before launch. We already have production users on this system. Is really important to know which ones are the most safe to do. And so understanding that maybe regions and VPCs don't often change very much. So there might be more cracks in what things aren't known. And so we, again, made it very safe in our environment with our tooling to make it fast to update our clusters. So in that case, we just say, okay, well, let's just replace all the instance types. And that's literally what we did the week before launch was, hey, this new instance type is better, or at least more available. Let's go to that. And we know we can get enough to the scale that we need. And so we roll out everything. I think it launched on, it was a Tuesday that launched on, it was the Monday before. We had, change request. Our tooling did great to kind of roll that out. And I was super proud of the team, and it just showed off everything of that montage. All that work paid off. But also the piece here is don't skimp on the other region, like the one over there that like isn't the primary, like scale that one too, because even though all the work is here, you're saying like this is primary, so we're just going to scale this one. No, all those other regions matter. And I'm just telling you right now, like if someone says like no, we just need to focus on this one, push back and say let's think about that again. Here we are, launch day, November. I honestly don't, it's on the back of my shirt. I don't remember the date. It was a Tuesday, and Monday we're rolling out things soft launch, apps and getting things prepped for it. I'm just watching graphs. At some point there's nothing more you can do. You just have to wait for the enemy to come. I mean, customers. And so here we are, like it's, rolling everything out. Oh, I'll get to the questions later. Rolling everything out, and like I need to sign off for the day. It was I checked it out. I saw the launch on my side. Press releases maybe aren't out yet, but I'm able to test on my end the things I need. And one thing that I learned here that is a faux pas for most people, that I love it, is okay to have users alert you. Like full stop. Like before I went to bed, I set a Twitter alert for a hashtag, and I said, you know what? I don't want every team's alerts. I don't want all the infrastructure alerts. I want to know mine from PagerDuty. But if customers are having problems, I would also like to know that. And that's okay. And I was woken up at 4 a.m. buzz, oh, looks like someone had a problem, you know, check it out, sign in a Slack. Hey, is this us? Do we know what's going on? Get a quick summary of someone else that was in a different time zone, was already awake. Cool. Mute that alarm, go back to sleep for a couple hours. Absolutely viable to have customers alert you. And I think that people, you know, it's always like, oh, you should have your own alerts. You should be able to find those things. But users have the experience, and have a user having a bad day or having a bad experience with it is also critical, even if it's not your stuff. So if you do care, like, it's funny because I go from Disney, which was guest experience obsessed, to Amazon, which is customer obsessed. And to me, it's the exact same thing, where I'm still looking at what is the customer experience and how are they treated in this environment. So, but that's launch day. I have a bunch of other stories inside of Trenches here that I can't get into. But like I said before, scale up that other region, because what a graph looks like when you switch regions under extreme load is super stressful, but also like kind of exciting. And I don't recommend it, but always make sure you have that backup, and it works, and things are scaled, and you can handle that load and switch at a global scale and also at a team scale. If you have individual teams and individual services behind the scenes you need to scale, make sure those have backups. Swarming problems is great. Don't offer all your feedback of like, hey, I know the problem, I know the solution. You are not an expert in your other team's stuff. Like, let them solve the problem, hang out, see if there are problems. You can even, like, you know, shadow in their chat rooms or something to see if there's something that you might have insights into, but don't offer those solutions out of the gates. It's just going to cause a lot of, you know, bad days for people that are already under stress. So let's look at the person and handle the people and say, like, hey, let's have some empathy for your team, what you're going through, and really lean on that empathy piece of like, we're all in this together. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will offer insights and help you and swarm that problem if you want me there. And that last piece, I think I mentioned it before, automation is great. Don't automate everything. Your assumptions are going to be wrong. Find the things that wake up people. Documentation in our case was more important than most of our automation. Some, you know, critical things like scale up, scale down infrastructure, that all worked great. That was pretty simple automation. It wasn't groundbreaking to say like, hey, CloudWatch, look at these metrics and scale up the cluster if it hits this. Like, that's not super new for a lot of people that are running in any sort of cloud environments. So automate the things that are important, but it's okay if a person has to go into the console and click a button. Like, don't think that you failed, that automation is the only way to go. So let's look at that as far as like where there's boundaries are for what you automate. Right here, past November, past the launch date, a week later, we actually launched in 3 more countries. It's not even on this graph because it was basically a non-event. It was extra load, but for us, it was smooth sailing from there. But we're heading right into March. 5 months later, we're going to launch in the UK. And so what does that look like? One thing we have to know at this point, you're scaling up. You don't know where this is going to end. You don't know when users are kind of going to tail off. But a lot of your choices are going to be wrong. It's fine. Everything, technology changes, assumptions change, scale changes. It's okay to be wrong and to modify that. Don't take it personally, and don't, you know, work with other teams and say, hey, I think, you know, you might need to look at this other way. One of the things for us, a key learning was scaling clusters. Blue-green deployments were the way we were scaling things out. We said, here's a cluster, here's an ASG, here's another ASG, switch over. That worked great at smaller scales, at hundreds of instances. That does not work great at thousands of instances. For the amount of time it takes to get a new ASG spun up and then drain the old one, you're spending double the infrastructure for a long time. And you may not be able to get all of that other, you know, ASG spun up in the same region because, again, resource constraints around if you're using the same ASG or the same instance type. There's a lot of things to consider at different scales. So for us, one of the things to learn was, you know, rolling releases didn't make sense at small scale. It made a lot of sense at large scale, but also question things like immutable infrastructure, right? Like, do I need to cut a new AMI to roll something out? Should I mutate an instance in place? Things like CoreOS and BottleRocket OS and Talos, like these things are mutating instances in place. Just reboot the system. That's a heck of a lot faster than requesting another 1,000 instances, let me tell you. So question those assumptions when you get to different scales and understand, hey, maybe all the best practices kind of go out the window for our environment or at our scale. I don't remember how much time I have left because my timer stopped working, but I'm just going to go right here to the end. March is coming up pretty quick. We made a great decision to scale up earlier. You're going to eat the cost, like I said, but the best thing about scaling up earlier and eating some of that cost, your people can sleep at night. Like that is super critical because once March hits, if you have tired people, they're not going to be helpful. And so doing scale up a month early rather than a couple weeks early allowed for you to find some of those edge cases, allowed for you to make some of those changes in a more safe way. And again, you can automate some of those things that wake up people at night. You can spend a little bit more time to make sure that people get rested. And I'm trying to remember when I was on call during any of this, I don't think anyone on my team actually had a alert that ever woke them up, which was amazing to me. We used a lot of things like EventBridge in AWS to trigger Lambdas that would do things in the cluster. Say, hey, alerting said this instance is having a problem, fire that over to EventBridge, and then do some logic on that side and say, oh, how many instances are in the cluster? If it's more than 70% full, cool, I'll just go ahead and drain that instance and mark it as unhealthy and it'll get replaced. Automatic. Like that sort of stuff was super critical for us when things like, Docker crashes on, let's say, like 0.001% of instances still happens occasionally. And so we don't necessarily have the expertise. We don't have the time to dig into it. It's okay just to automate that and say, just get rid of it. Like I'm okay with throwing that away, but automate that piece of it so that no one gets woken up to do the, AWS mark on health instance of healthy commands. That sort of stuff goes a long way. March, UK launch happened. Super successful. April, May, boom, we hit 54 million users, which is right around when I was actually leaving. I stayed through the UK launch, which was amazing just to see how this infrastructure and how the people adapted to making this a successful launch for all the users and everything else. And the Disney Plus is now in like 20 something countries, which is amazing just to see them being able to continue that on and scale that out to even more regions, more users. And they just last month had 60 million users. So it's been an awesome ride just to see how that team and infrastructure has evolved. And that's the talk. That's, how we're able to do it, how, you need to adapt a lot of the stuff to your own environments and your own expertise and the skill sets you have and what the workflows are for, your teams. But automate the simple things that, are critical, don't wake people up at nights, and have empathy are really like key learnings from all of this. So that's all I got.
Awesome. Great stuff, Justin. Thank you very, very much. It was excellent talk. I really enjoyed it. And 60 million, that's sort of pretty much the entire population of the UK, every man, woman, child, and everything in between, across the world, obviously. But yeah, that's I don't think scaling gets much more of an order of magnitude bigger than that. So.
And
fantastic.
I can answer some of the questions in chat now. I don't know if we want to roll into the panel. I'm also sticking around for the happy hour after.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, did you want to pick questions out of the chat? I mean, I picked some out, or if you want to just pick the ones that you like the look of.
I mean, if you have something specific, I'm only scrolling up a little bit here, but monitoring and alerting, we were a mix of either CloudWatch logs, but also Datadog. We had some Splunk, we had some New Relic. It was all over the place. Again, teams in a very it was prescribed. Hey, here's our chosen way to do it inside of our clusters. Like we recommended people a lot of times to use Datadog because that's what we were integrating into the system, but teams were allowed to pick whatever they wanted. So a lot of our tooling was it wasn't in Datadog, it was in New Relic, or it was in Splunk, or just CloudWatch, which was fantastic for scaling up, but it was really mixed. It wasn't one solution is the way to do it. Each team had their own preferences, and how they automated and stood that up was absolutely great. Monitoring, I think, was all centralized on PagerDuty, but basically every tool integrated with PagerDuty to actually send the alerts, which was great for us. But I never saw anyone using anything other than PagerDuty.
Okay, cool. Yes, so some of the other questions. What's the tab?
I saw a question about load testing.
Yes, that was going to be the one I was going to ask. So Ishan was asking about that.
That one's super hard because it matters a lot what you're running. And so in our, like for the things I was running, our major apps were basically step functions, and it's like Lambda scale up, no problem. Like we didn't have an issue with load testing our API. It wasn't called that often. For the underlying infrastructure, we saw once we started scaling that up, we saw how users of the system were sending logs to disk, were doing things that we had to mitigate. And so things like not writing to disk, if you don't have to, is amazing. I love Docker integration with Journal D. A lot of people hate systemd, hate Journal D. I love it. Journal D writes would flush, but my IO constraints at the disk level were on writes. So if you're using Docker with JSON logs, you're writing every line to disk. Every log is a disk write. And if you're shipping those somewhere, your agents are doing a read for every disk. So every line you write from any container is at least two, one read, one write. You write to the journal and you suck out of the journal, that's in memory. And all your disk problems go away, essentially. And so like some fascinating things when you look at those sorts of scaling of like, okay, where are my constraints? Is my constraint on the network? Is it on a disk? There's problems, there's ways you can solve that at low levels. There's ways you can solve that at higher levels. And so finding the one that's most impactful across the board was really critical for us. And we managed the AMIs and we're able to roll those out quickly to say, hey, we don't write to our syslog, turned it off. I love turning off our syslog. Like that was like the best thing. Like I've been a sysadmin for such a long time. Turning that off was a great feeling to me. And I was like, hey, guess what? Everything's in the journal now. If it can't pull from the journal, you don't get your logs. And it was great because we had tooling that needed to be updated. We worked with vendors that maybe didn't support it yet, but for us, it solved a lot of problems.
Awesome, that's great. We're a little bit short on time, so if everyone's all right, we'll cut
Yeah,
short
I'll stick
any
around. So I mean,
questions.
I'm on the panel. We can answer some more questions later, but yeah, let's jump into it.
Okay, and the only other thing I was going to comment on is comment from Corcoran, who said, "Oh my." I don't know what that was in relation to, but I think isn't that George Takei, which is Star Trek, which is the wrong franchise, right? Anyway, never mind. Brilliant. So, Justin, thank you very, very much. Anybody wants to unmute and just give a little round of applause, please feel free to do that. Yes. Brilliant. Okay, cool. So let's move on. So yes, we'll do a panel session now. Ordinarily, if we were in a physical meeting place, we'll be rearranging chairs so we can all sit down nicely and I can sit on the end with my microphone and pass it along. So we can't do that here, but I think we've got everyone here who's paneling. Hannah's got his headset, excellent. Yeah, John and Kevin in here. I can see you all there with your video on. Brilliant, thank you very much. So yeah, the panel. So the topic of the panel is around pretty much the same sort of stuff that Justin was talking about. But obviously, Justin works for a pretty special organisation. Not what I'm saying that everyone else's organisations aren't special. Maybe I should use the word specialised in terms of the resources that they needed, how they needed to scale. So what we've assembled now is a panel of people who have been involved in similar things, not necessarily scaled up to 60 million users, and not necessarily on the same kit or with the same requirements. So we've got a nice breadth of experience and people on the call who can have a nice little chat about scaling infrastructure. So we'll start off just by doing some introductions, if that's all right. So if we can just go around the room quickly. First on my list is John Keegan from DWP. Did you want to just introduce yourself and say hello?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm John Keegan, consultant, transformation consultant. Been working with DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, for about the last 4 years on their whole journey to hybrid cloud. So on-premise data center infrastructure as well as AWS and Azure.
Excellent, thank you. And then next up is Kevin.
Yes, hello, I'm Kevin Schmidt. I'm the CTO of Century Tech. We are an AI-powered remote learning solution, which obviously got a lot of interest out of COVID. We are still a startup, I would say. We are 80 people in total, so I think that probably falls under startup. Infrastructure-wise, we are pure AWS, pretty much fully automated with Terraform, EKS Kubernetes for the services, and obviously heavy reliance on stuff like RDS, CloudFront, Amazon machine learning services, and so on.
Brilliant, thank you, Kevin. And then Hamad. So Hamad has spoken for London DevOps back in the old physical world. Some very well received talks. Been having a very long time, so very delighted to be on the panel as well. Do you want to just introduce yourself? Oh, you're muted, mate. That's better.
I knew I'm gonna miss.
Someone's gonna do it.
So, yeah, thanks, Matt. Hi everyone. My name is Hamad Sulatani. As Matt said, I have been in at London DevOps before. Amazing firm. But since I had my son born about 4 years ago, I missed the evening. Meetup. So really glad to be back here. I'm head of application services at IG Group, which provides a financial trading platform. So you can buy, sell stock, win money, but most often lose money if you don't know what you're doing. I have been at IG for about 10 years, starting from development, but then moving to build a reliability team, DevOps team. And I'm trying to be as productive as possible in a heavily regulated sector. So that's me.
Excellent, thank you, Hamad. And finally, by no means last, but by no means least, of course, our very own Mark Lewis. Say hello, Mark.
Everyone, so my name is Mark. I co-organize London DevOps with Matt, Jack, and Alex. And my experience on these, I directly was involved in building up platforms and scaling up platforms, both for Trainline and Nationwide Building Society as well. And in other roles, I've been helping organizations scale up, like I said, Volkswagen, GoCompare, Money Supermarkets, etc., etc.
Excellent, thank you to everyone. Thank you very much for coming along. So how's this going to work? So we're going to kick off with a few seed questions. I'm hoping to get a bit of discussion going between not only between the panelists, but also you there watching along at home. As an attendee, feel free to put some comments into the chat, or if you're feeling really opinionated, I know who you are, then come off mute and join the debate. I don't know how well it's going to work if we have 10 people come off mute all at the same time, but we'll deal with that problem if it occurs. Cool. All right, so let's just kick off. So yeah, we've heard from Justin, and again, a question to anyone, so anyone wants to step forward and speak to this, then please do. We've heard from Justin some of the unique challenges that they have around building infrastructure for a very big TV company. Is it just TV companies who can learn from this sort of thing, or is it something that you can actually? Are there learnings in a similar vein that you can take into, for example, regulated financial services or a large government department?
I can start with financial services. Yeah. So what really from Justin's talk stuck with me was investment in automation early on to save time and sanity later. And I can see how in our story at IG, sometimes we missed out of those key infrastructure automation steps to deliver business functionality or respond to regulatory requirement with a hard deadline, but then got caught up later on. So if I go back in time, could be my previous self a few years ago, I wouldn't compromise on building systems with a mindset of you need minimum to zero kind of maintenance of infrastructure moving forward. So that point was really kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, it feels like that's one of the things that is probably kind of universal, isn't it? It's maybe the scale isn't the same, but
yeah,
I could build on that. Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, I was going to say there is another aspect to it is in a regulatory environment, and that's segregation of duties. So the more automation you have, the less concern and conversation with compliance you have in terms of who's going to do what. they're very careful which person or people does what, but you don't get many questions on what system does what. So that's another aspect of it. Sorry, John, over to you.
No, you're going to make a similar point really around, automation is really, really key. In the presentation earlier, absolutely got that. But a couple of points I took away as well is don't forget your documentation. You need to make sure that if an engineer is getting called out in the night, they know what to do with a particular event, a particular task. So it's as much about making sure you've got the operational wrap around it. The experience that we've had within DWP recently, the UK pandemic, we've gone from having about 10,000 remote workers with a concurrency of about 6,000. And within a period of about 6 weeks, we managed to grow that to 60,000 people could actually work remotely. So that ability to scale that was mentioned and to not be completely locked into what your schedule is, what your release is. I think that's true across pretty much all IT industry now, that your ability to actually change direction and flex, to me, whether it's the economic needs of the country or whether it's the applications and services you're doing, I think that's really important. Our ability to change and deliver stuff at pace is probably, we'd never seen that amount of pressure before.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me, I do agree with both of the other panelists, of course. One of the things that struck me with the talk is two other things, which are finding your limits and scale early, and how they are interleaved, because that is always a problem. The things that you don't know if you scale up, and for everybody, I find that API limits were mentioned, which is a thing that happens quite often. Hitting an AWS limit that you weren't quite aware of when you scale up is a huge pain that you might, and if you don't scale early, and that happens during production deploy, it's all over.
Yeah, just picking up on something that Hamid mentioned, and John indirectly. Sorry, I've been fiddling with my microphone and it's causing noise, so I'm gonna stop doing that. The needs of like change boards and industry regulation, and this came up with in Justin's talk as well, where like, oh, you got a code freeze, and if you want to change anything on the site, e.g. fixing something by changing some code, because YAML is code and Terraform things are code and everything is code, then you obviously have to change that. Does that give you, I mean, a question, I guess largely to Hamid, although to John to an extent as well, are those sort of things actually changeable, given that you go into this and you launch a service and then you have to change some stuff, but then the full weight of the bureaucracy kind of lands on you? Are they things you can change? Mark, go.
Yeah, so at Nationwide, we had this exact problem, right? We have to go through changing boards, approval boards, review boards, tech steering boards, etc., etc. The problem is that the business didn't want to change that, of course, because that's de-risking the whole infrastructure. But then we got to the point where we could have that kind of conversation with the business to go down to the root of why the boards were there. What is the objective? What is the reason and the mission of those boards, right? And from there, we then created something called continuous governance. And it's a new practice. And what it does is that it reaches agreements with these boards about what are the acceptable standards of solutions that need to go out, be it platform infrastructure or new applications, and then create infrastructure as code around those agreed practices. So we are trying, not there yet, but we are trying to change things from approval for everything to approval by exception, where if your new piece of code or a new component of the platform does not fit the continuous policy as code, then it needs to go through review boards. And at the end of that, there's a decision of, is this something that we want to do for everything or something that we want to do just for this thing? And if it's for everything, then we change the policy.
That's very interesting. We were going, Mark, through the similar exercise. Probably our naming are not as careful as yours. We call it deploy maturity or release maturity. But essentially, as number of application and not only your technical infrastructure scales, but also your development teams scales. Having a development group of 700, 800 people in 3 different regions, and each of them developing it slightly in a different way, you will end up with an environment that respond to incidents or events in a very different way and in a non-standard way, and then it becomes very difficult to manage. So it kind of led into similar sort of exercise of defining, okay, what should be our operational standards or minimum standards expected from applications, being, I don't know, you can think of a timeouts or back pressures all the way through the documentation and then continues to the pipeline. And then so we kind of have that pain, but then it leads to the point of again, if I go back, we kind of at IG, we took reliability slightly separate to our platform. So we had platform engineering, building containers and component that application could run on, but then reliability of those applications were totally different team, different approach. And we're actually thinking that maybe we should, if I go back, I should bake the reliability engineering team into a platform and offer a platform that at its very basic vanilla offering takes care of those cross-cutting concerns, and devs will just focus on writing logic because you have handled those in a standard way across company. But it's a big debate internally at the moment. Obviously, where you draw that boundary, because it will cause limitations. We haven't, for software engineers and developers, we haven't settled yet, but it's a debate that is going on. I don't know if anyone else has a view on that. It will be very interesting to hear.
Yeah, DWP is quite interesting in that there's quite a mix of different things. So as an example, there are applications that are 10, 20-year-old that we can't do pipeline infrastructure, we can't do standard pipeline development and release across them. So there is a need to go through change boards and understand the impacts on dependent systems and really be quite careful, because when the releases are released, they're quite a big release. On the other end of the scale though, we've got things being developed, deployed into AWS, where you can take things through your different environments through the life cycle. You can promote the code, you can promote the infrastructure, you can build in automated testing into the pipeline tools. So the department's been doing some stuff recently with Open Policy Agent. So using that as a way to verify the configurations, verify things like security groups. So as opposed to a change board and a manual process for checking a bunch of stuff, Open Policy Agent can put the same controls in and do that in the pipeline as part of an instant release. So I think there's different approaches that can be taken depending on the infrastructure and the application architecture.
Yeah.
For me, one of the big things about boards, right? I have ITIL certification, right? If you know ITIL, like they have all sorts of change boards and everything is there. Like I'm very used to that environment. And really the key thing that DevOps taught a lot of us, right, was like it's about risk management, and it's about doing the things that are hard to do, doing them frequently, and saying, hey, that change is risky, so we're going to do it all the time until we get better at it. And then from that you can really understand, like you can de-risk it and you just get confidence and you say, hey, this thing used to take us, a week or two to change some setting. And that was literally what we were doing with the clusters, is the clusters used to take weeks to make sure that everything was tested, make sure everything was secure, and then go through a change request downtime, and do all that communication. And we automated that. We did it so frequently that we said, hey, our confidence skyrocketed because that thing was hard for us to do. So we just did it more. And we said, that's the DevOps approach. And that's the way that we wanted to do it. And then everyone that we said, whenever we said, hey, I need a downtime for this, they're like, why are you asking me for a downtime? Just do it. Like, you don't ask me when you write a file to disk, do you? It's like it's not a fault, a failure point anymore. It's like, no, like we're pretty sure that file is gonna get written to disk. And we've done cluster rotation so often that it was just like, hey, we need to do this. And like, okay, when are you gonna do it? Just tell people, like, it's fine. Like it got that point where it was just, there was so much confidence in the tooling and that process, whether that was, OPA or checking config and doing this stuff. Like when you fall, you're going to fail at some point going through that process of like, oh, we messed up. You are going to have to reset a little bit, but again, just keep doing it frequently. And that DevOps approach of doing the hard things all the time really helps gain that confidence. And then those boards really, they're like, you're wasting our time. Just go do it. Like we'll add an exception for you or whatever the case is.
Exactly. I completely agree with you on that. The problem is, at least I would say in a bank or in an insurance company, is mainly how do you word that in a way that people don't run scared and say you're crazy. So one of the things that we did is that one of the hardest things for any institution is disaster recovery, right? Everybody says that they are disaster recovery ready, but nobody is actually exercising disaster recovery. So the moment there's something really bad going on, everybody just runs scared like headless chickens. So one of the things that we did is exactly what you said. We said, okay, we're going to give you a new cluster. You can use it as much as you want for 3 months. After 3 months, we're going to get a gun, point it to the head of the cluster and kill it. And then you have to do it again. And why we said 3 months, just to not disrupt the teams, but at the same time, we just wanted to make sure that they could deploy something and exercise that until it became muscle memory.
Mark, so I guess this the point you mentioned is within Nationwide. Is that do you do that exercise? What is your tech stack? Is it on cloud? Is it on prem? Is it hybrid? Are you doing that exercise on kind of both type of platform?
The way Nationwide works, as most bank works, is that it's hybrid, so there's cloud and there's data center, but we are not allowed to talk to each other, just for risk control reasons, which I find silly. But we were doing that on cloud mainly, and we were doing that on cloud, but the data center, so the physical data center guys were very interested in this as well. And the main reason of that is security, right? So if you're able to install a fresh cluster every 3 months, the risk of keep running that cluster and keep that cluster up to date and with zero exploits diminishes quite a lot, in the sense that in 3 months, unless there's something very big, it's quite difficult for a very bad bug or very bad exploit to appear. So every 3 months you get something completely fresh from zero with all the latest security policies, all the latest infrastructure as code, and you can keep exercising that.
Just picking up on
Okay.
the DR point, I think that's quite interesting as well, particularly with what we got available within AWS and Azure in the department's instance. Now, there's been recent outages on both those provider platforms in the UK, taking out availability zones in the last month, one on each. Now, if you architect your applications correctly, you're using multiple availability zones, that should be completely transparent. But it's kind of drilling that into all the teams to make sure that you are making use of those to mitigate those DR recoveries. So I wouldn't say DWP's got it perfect yet. There are areas that are better than others. But just interested in other people seeing the same sort of challenges.
One thing that we do, so we do something fairly similar to Justin, right? In the sense that I want to deploy it. Like, yeah, it's your application. You deploy whenever you want. You don't have to let us know. Just do it. But as we are responsible for the platform, what we also do is that we keep walking about around the deployments and the deployment objects and looking at how they are done. And we do that in a semi-automatic way, in the sense that it's a fairly silly Python script, and it looks for how many availability zones you have deployed things in. If it's one, then we're going to go back to you and say, hey, this is a very bad idea. We're not going to fix it for you, but just so you know, if that availability zone goes down and then suddenly you're on fire, we're just going to see you burn. We're not going to help you. And that will be a lesson. So in that sense, I said, there's only so much you can do, because if if you try to prove everything, then you become the changing board, and that's something that you don't want to do.
Sure.
I have a question. Maybe I'll ask Justin, but probably will be more applicable in nationwide or DWP because of the age of the platform and or a history of the tech department. So one problem we are facing, especially last 5 years when the development team was massively increased and a lot of new product was launched, was infrastructure team became a natural owner of Orphane applications and piece of logic that no other dev owns it anymore now. Probably many of them they don't work at IG anymore, or the ones that they know it, they already moved on new projects, more cooler projects. And then managing availability of those Orphane projects has become a massive challenge for us. And I wonder, I'm keen to hear how is it, for instance, managed in other organizations, how that problem is addressed. Mark, I see you shaking. I don't know if it's feeling the same pain or you're having an answer for me.
I'm feeling the same pain as, I would say, big organizations in general. What they do is that they think a new application is a great idea. They invest some fairly insane amount of money at that. And as soon as it doesn't work, they just fire everyone, even if there's consumers of that application still there. And there's several cases where we have applications like, yeah, this application is not working. Who do we call? It's like, no one. It's just not working. So that's something that we didn't, it's very difficult to solve, right? But at the same time, we just use the rule. It's a kind of French rule of the phone. Whoever picks up the phone, that's the boss, right? So we just say, hey, this application is not working. Whoever replies is the boss, because there's no one. And that's, I know that's not strictly a legal way to do it, but that kind of worked for us, because that way we would identify people that were part of that team before and be able to send them some of the pain their way, while at the same time just going back to the organization and saying, by the way, that great idea that you had and then you killed is still running. So do you have any plan?
Yeah.
So I can give you a view and DWP perspective of it, because there's been quite a few challenges that they've had over the last sort of 5 years as exiting quite big hosting contracts with other third parties and bringing things back in-house, a drive to move things into public cloud first, but recognizing you can't do that, particularly when you've got orphaned applications that you can't get anyone to have to do development to make it actually cloud native and make it work. So the department's come up with criteria, site reliability engineering criteria to move it into the cloud. You need the monitoring in place. You need to be able to orchestrate building a new thing. We need to make sure it's available in multiple availability zones. But it's difficult to actually enforce that when you've got an orphaned application. So there's been bits of compromise to get things going so that things be moved out of old hosting environments, but do it in a state that it's not quite lift and shift, because you still want to actually optimize that, and then work through how you mitigate things like old versions of operating systems. You've got challenges with some of the cloud providers. They'll only support an operating system of a certain version, although you can technically deploy it onto those platforms. You start to run into issues, and we've had some challenges with hypervisor mismatches. So it's not an easy. Orphaned applications is quite a challenge.
All right, let's shoot over to the other end of the scale. Just want to bring Kevin in a bit more and share some of his experiences. We've been talking a lot about the big companies and how you respond to, well, frankly, the onset of new technology we could never have dreamed of, and figuring how to retrofit that to 10 or 20-year-old applications. But if you're in the privileged position to be just starting up, and you start looking at this kind of this potential hyper growth, What sort of questions can you start asking the business and marketing people who are like, yeah, we're going to have 1 billion users, we're going to have 60 million users. No, actually, that one's true. How do you actually start to get that right and set yourself on a path to success?
Yeah, that's actually a good question and a big problem. And I'm surprised how often this conversation doesn't happen or happens way too late. I mean, it wasn't only once that I had somebody say, oh, we're starting a marketing campaign of $2 million and it starts tonight in Asia. And then you're like, what? And that can be, especially in certain size of company, that communication with the ops team can be a problem. In a small startup, not so much, more in the like middle-sized, the 200 people company, where stuff can happen quickly, but the communication lines might not always be that great. And then the other thing is asking, I think, the right people, and a lot of them, because if you ask your, say, I'm not want to talk badly about marketing, but if you talk your typical marketing person, how many users do you think you can get from this campaign? They're going to say something in the line of all of them. What I found helpful is ask the business analyst, because somewhere there's always a business analyst involved in every campaign. And you can ask them questions like, what is your most optimistic and pessimistic estimate for the new users that will come on board with this? And they have answers for this, which is great. And then you have a better idea of what you need to scale for. And obviously, sometimes stuff goes crazy, but most of the times, then you get like a really good idea. But if you want to scale early, you need to know early. And it's good. What I found always to just have these communication lines open to those other departments that make those decisions, which if you're in DevOps or further down the line like say like middleware, you might not always get the message at the right time.
Excellent, thank you, Kevin. Anybody else want to follow up on that at all? No, fine, okay, whatever. That's cool. Yeah, it's sometimes it's difficult for people to get people to be realistic, isn't it? And getting them to consider the questions in the right actual context can be a big old challenge there. Okay, so just want to look to the questions that we've had from the floor. We've got quite a lot of technical Terraform type questions, so I'm not sure if anybody wants to chime in on that, but I've got one. So sorry, I'm not actually going to read out the Terraform ones because I don't quite understand them well enough to convey them. But we're talking about scaling up and scaling down. So a question from Aaron, who's talking about what's the best practice for scaling up and down that you guys know of, in terms of making sure that you have hardware up and ready. So does it make sense to scale up early, keep instances up even at higher cost, or can you kind of can you skin it a bit better than that? Anybody got thoughts and experiences, practices on that one?
So, I mean, obviously, like, it's going to cost some money, but to Kevin's point earlier, like, you need the business analysis to know like where the users are coming from, what sort of expectations you have, and have some, you got to do some math at some point, right? Like, someone needs to actually calculate out like this many machines or these instance types or whatever can handle this many users with this many apps. And someone just needs to do some basic arithmetic and say, okay, this is what we need. And whether you're on-prem, whether you're in a cloud, it looks a lot different depending on your workloads too, right? Like, I came from Disney Animation, where we had 0 public websites. Like, there was no like users coming to us. Like, we rendered movies. And so like our workload was completely different because we didn't have this on demand. Like, once we shipped the product, it went to a theater and we just wiped our hands, we were done. Right? Like we didn't have to do anything else, which was an amazing, like exactly the opposite from a streaming service, which was like, once we turned it on, everyone came. And it was amazing to sell box software. I still think movies are box software. Like, it goes to a movie, it sits on a disc, and we rendered that, but like that time constraint of like where we were scaling and how we were doing that scaling was completely different than on-demand people coming and knocking at your door. So if you're doing machine learning or, some sort of batch workloads, that type of calculus of like, where do I need machines and how is going to look completely different. So I mean, the fundamentals of like CPU and memory and disk IO are kind of like the core resources of a machine. And if you're still thinking in that sort of sense, that's great. Just stick with that for the very beginning if you're getting started, in my opinion. There's other things around like looking at requests and user latencies and a lot of other things you can do with more complex systems. And plenty of vendors will sell you that tool. Plenty of open source things will claim they do it great, and really just find the thing that like fits your expertise and lines up with your math, in my opinion. It's just like, if your math says like, I'm going to get, 10 users, if you don't have the math, do that first. If you say I have 100 users, hey, how many machines do I need for this thing for all these APIs? And I would start there, just like do some fundamental math, look at CPU and memory first, disk IO is usually next, and then from there look at load balancers, network requests, that sort of stuff, because those are usually the next thing that kind of fill up. But you have to have some baseline of what your infrastructure can handle at some unit of measurements. And so for like, for render jobs, for us, it was a frame. Like, how many frames can we render on this much CPU and memory? And like, what is our compute model? For streaming services, it was completely different. Like, how many user signups and bill processing and that sort of stuff can we scale at this many instances? So look at your workloads and do math.
Yeah, I would also like to add to that one problem that I keep finding again and again in different companies. Scaling up is easy. Scaling up has been done. Everybody has been thinking about scaling up. The only question there for me is being able to scale up on time, to be able to get all the traffic load or whatever else. But depending on the application, scaling down is freaking hard. Like, it's very difficult, and most people don't even think about that because, hey, cloud is very cheap, right? Until suddenly the company gets like $50,000 extra in 1 month and go, what the hell happened here? So yeah, that. For me, the main thing when we're talking about scaling up and scaling down is what kind of application, as Justin said, but especially what is your strategy to scale down once you stop using that resource?
I'd agree with that, just to build as getters. And it's also to switch things off. So switch things off. So within your non-production environments or even production environments where you've only got a service that runs for a certain amount of time, then scale it down. Get the tags in place to switch things off within your dev test, your staging, your performance testing environments, and for the actual production ones, scale things down when you know what the peaks are going to be. So absolutely agree with the point about you get a baseline you need to understand for your peaks, but really important that you scale things down, otherwise your growth only goes in one direction.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good point. With learning software, especially one that's used in schools like ours, we have extremely spiky day traffic and almost no activity at night. So it would be like, it would be very cost effective to scale the infrastructure down, but scaling down is not always quite as easy because some applications don't like it particularly, and not all the developers have gotten the message that this needs to be done. So sometimes you do run into those kind of problems a lot. Another thing I would like to get to Justin's point about the metric, I think you just have to find the core metric also what matters to you. For me, it's usually I look at concurrent users more than anything else because that's my spiky traffic, and all the other stuff floats from there, API times, and then build the scaling around that. But finding that can quite difficult. Like you start with CPU, but there's some other bottlenecks you might have. You won't be surprised how often other metrics have much more effect on you than just pure CPU time.
Yeah, I mean, understanding user behaviors and being able to identify the metrics that reflect on user behaviors will be helpful in our case for scaling up, but sometimes it's just impossible. So in the business that we are, you have users using your platform, and that's one aspect of load on the platform. But on the other hand, you have price ticks, market movements going up and down, which is completely unpredictable, and to some extent not really correlated to number of users on the platform. And speed of events is so fast that it's just sometimes not possible. So a news comes out, typically since last 4 years, Trump being in the office, he says something, and then all of a sudden you get lots of users wanting to trade, and you just wouldn't have enough time to scale up and up for it. So in our case, we had to just build a lot of capacity in our normal usage, because we can't just predict what's going to happen. And our infrastructure team all signed up to following Trump's Twitter, because that's normally a good indication when we're going to get a spike.
Wow, I didn't expect you to mention that. That's something I never even considered. But it goes to show that how much the world has changed and how much it reacts on to social media and well, not I'm just saying Trump is on social media, but definitely not the sort of situation I imagine you thought you'd be in, Hamid. But there we go. Okay, so we're way over time. Sorry for anyone who's got the kettle on or is waiting for their food or whatever. So we're going to wrap up there. I think that's been a really, really good panel session. So I'd like to thank very much, say thanks very much to, in the order on my screen, Hamid, to Mark, Kevin, and John, and also, of course, to Justin for a fantastic talk on his scaling adventures. So thank you to all of you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So we're about done. I'm going to leave the Zoom open. I've got a Nando's coming at some point, so I don't know how long we're going to stay on for. We're going to leave the Zoom open so we can chat, have social, get beers out, whatever. Please feel free to drop off now if you want to, or stay on for the social. We'll see who's left. I suspect it will be the usual suspects, but please stay on if you want to. We'll do the next London DevOps number 55, probably in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. Please let us know how you thought this format works. We've done panels before, but we've never done a virtual panel before. Did it work as well as it does on a stage? I'm not sure. Well, I am sure. I think it did, but please let us know what you think. Let us know if you want to be a panelist or if you want to do a talk. Thanks also to Corcoran. I've noticed you filled in quite a lot of questions in the chat. I've not been able to keep up with the chat, so apologies if you've asked questions in there that I've not asked. So thank you for that. So yeah, if you want to be a panelist, a speaker, go on this podcast if we get it off the ground, anything like that, please do get in touch. Other than that, thanks very much for coming, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take it easy. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So.